A sharp intake of breath. Cold air filled Adrian Cross's lungs as his eyes shot open. Everything around him was white. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. All featureless, seamless, endless. Sterile void. He sat up too quickly, his head spinning, stomach lurching as though the ground itself had moved beneath him. No memories of how he got here. He reached for his wrist instinctively. A smooth, metallic band hugged his skin, its tiny screen glowing with shifting numbers. 14 minutes and 37 seconds. The numbers flickered, counting down. Panic bloomed in his chest. Was it a timer? A countdown to what? Adrian pushed himself to his feet. His breath unsteady. There were no doors, no seams in the walls. He ran his hands along the surface, feeling nothing but cold smoothness. His reflection stared back at him in the gloss of the walls. Short dark hair, sharp cheekbones, weary green eyes. He looked the same. But something felt wrong. A faint hum vibrated through the air. A voice, synthetic and distant, crackled to life. Prisoner 42. Observation cycle commencing. His pulse hammered. Prisoner. Observation cycle. What the hell was this place? Then, without warning, a section of the wall melted away, revealing a narrow passage. Beyond it, a second room identical to this one. No sign of a door. The numbers on his wristband flickered again. 12 minutes and 6 seconds. He hesitated. The air in this place carried a charge, a faint static that made his skin prickle. The voice had said observation cycle. That meant someone, something was watching. He swallowed hard and stepped through. The second room was the same. Silent. But not quite identical. Chair. A single metal chair sat in the center. Adrian approached cautiously, eyes scanning for anything that might give him an answer. The wristband numbers dropped. 9 minutes and 43 seconds. The hum returned, louder now. A new sound followed, faint footsteps. Someone else was here. A figure emerged from the far side of the room. A woman with dark curls pulled back from her sharp features. Her eyes locked onto him instantly, wary, calculating. She wore the same gray jumpsuit he did. You too. Her voice was low, tense. Adrian's throat was dry. What is this place? The woman exhaled, folding her arms. A question I stopped asking a long time ago. That sent a chill down his spine. How long have you been here? She gave him a look, something between amusement and exhaustion. That depends. Do you mean this cycle or the last 100? Adrian's fingers tightened into a fist. His mind struggled to piece this together. What do you mean? Mira. She cut him off before he could finish. That's my name. And I'm guessing you don't remember much either. His breath hitched. You've seen me before. Mira hesitated. Yes. But you've never seen me. The words didn't make sense. Before Adrian could press, the room shifted. A subtle, sickening lurch, like reality itself had glitched. The chair flickered, appearing on the opposite side of the room for a split second before returning. A barely perceptible distortion, but enough to send his heart pounding. Mira cursed under her breath. Not again. Not again. Adrian's pulse raced. What the hell is going on? The hum rose to a deafening pitch. The wristband blinked rapidly. 4 minutes and 21 seconds. Then the wall opened again, revealing another corridor. This time it wasn't empty. A man stood at the threshold. Taller than both of them, broad-shouldered, with streaks of gray in his short-cropped hair. His eyes, sharp and watchful, carried something different from Myra's, understanding. Unlike them, he didn't look confused. You're new, the man said, looking Adrian over. At least, this version of you is. Adrian's skin went cold. Who are you? Jonas, the man said. And if you want answers, we need to move. Now. Mira shot him a sharp look. You sure we have time for another explanation? Jonas glanced at his own wristband. His numbers were lower. 2 minutes and 58 seconds. Not much of a choice, he said. Adrian shook his head, frustration bubbling over. Someone needs to tell me what's happening. Now. Jonas exhaled, stepping closer. This isn't a prison in the way you think it is. It's a test, an experiment. And we're the subjects. Adrian's breath caught. What kind of experiment? Jonas met his gaze, unblinking. One that resets reality every time we reach zero. The word sent a sickening weight to Adrian's stomach. You're saying this cycle resets? Myra's jaw clenched. And when it does, you won't remember any of this. The wristband counted down. 1 minute and 12 seconds. Adrian staggered back, his mind screaming in protest. That's insane. The walls flickered. This time, not just a single chair moving, but the entire room pulsing, its edges fraying like static on an old screen. Jonas grabbed his arm. Believe me or don't. But if you don't move now, you'll wake up in that same white room again with no memory of this conversation. Adrian's heart pounded. He had no reason to trust them. No reason to believe a single word. But deep in his gut, something told him they weren't lying. He had less than a minute to decide. Mira was already at the corridor, looking back with urgency. Jonas's grip tightened on his arm, his expression grim. And as the countdown reached 30 seconds, Adrian ran. The corridor stretched before them, smooth and white, as if carved from the same impossible material as the rest of this place. Adrian's pulse pounded in his ears as he ran, Mira just ahead of him, Jonas behind. The air itself seemed electric, buzzing with an unseen force. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision, distortions that vanished the moment he turned his head. They reached another doorway, no handle, no seams, just a smooth wall. But as Mira approached, her wristband blinked, and the surface shimmered before peeling away like liquid glass. Adrian hesitated. What is this? Mira barely spared him a glance. The next layer. Before he could ask what that meant, Jonas shoved him forward. No time. The second room was different. Where the previous spaces had been empty, sterile, this one was cluttered. Screens lined the walls, displaying lines of shifting code, graphs, and images that flickered too quickly to register. In the center stood a metallic table, its surface covered in strange, cube-like devices. Jonas moved toward one of the screens, fingers dancing across the interface. The images slowed, resolving into something intelligible, a live feed of themselves. Adrian's breath caught. He saw himself, Mira, Jonas, standing in the very room they were in, staring at the screens. Then, in the reflection, something shifted. A second Jonas stood beside the first, watching with an expression of quiet amusement. Adrian whirled, but the real Jonas hadn't moved. His stomach twisted. What the hell was that? Jonas's jaw tightened. Echo! Mira ran a hand through her hair, exhaling sharply. The deeper we go, the less stable the rules become. Adrian shook his head, trying to ground himself. Rules? What rules? Jonas didn't look at him. You ever heard of quantum superposition? Adrian hesitated. The idea that a particle exists in multiple states until observed. Jonas nodded. Apply that concept here. This place isn't just a prison. It's an experiment on observation itself. We exist in multiple states at once. The more we try to force reality into something coherent, the more unstable it becomes. Adrian's skin prickled. That doesn't make sense. None of this does, Mira muttered. That's the problem. A metallic chime rang through the air. The screens flickered again. This time the footage had changed. Adrian stepped closer, his throat tightening. The display no longer showed them standing there. It showed them lying motionless on the floor. Bodies still. Eyes open. Adrian's heartbeat thundered. We have to go. Jonas turned sharply, already moving toward the next door. Mira didn't argue. Adrian lingered for half a second longer, watching his own lifeless reflection on the screen. Then he forced himself to follow. They entered another corridor, but something was different. The walls pulsed almost like breathing. The air smelled sharp, metallic. Jonas slowed. "We're nearing the threshold." Mira shot him a look. "How do you know?" Jonas lifted his wristband. The numbers had stopped counting down. Instead they displayed a single word: collapse. Mira swore. "We're running out of time." Adrian's hands curled into fists. "Running out of time for what?" Jonas exhaled, his voice heavy. "For a decision." Before Adrian could ask what decision, the floor beneath them shifted. Not a tremor, not an earthquake. Something far worse. It felt as if the entire structure of reality had blinked, like the ground had been momentarily removed and then hastily replaced. Adrian stumbled, catching himself against the wall. The surface was no longer smooth. It was rippling, shifting beneath his palm like liquid metal. His chest tightened. "What's happening?" Jonas turned, urgency in his eyes. "We're reaching the point where the observation collapses. We have to decide how this ends." Mira grabbed his wrist. "It's now or never." Adrian's pulse pounded. "Decide what?" The walls flickered. From the corner of his eye, Adrian saw movement, figures emerging from the distorted space. Not strangers, themselves. Versions of them, fractured across possibilities. Some running, some frozen in place, some lying still. His mind rebelled against the sight. "This isn't real." Jonas's voice was grim. "It's as real as it gets." The wristbands pulsed. The numbers shifted again. Collapse imminent. Mira grabbed Adrian's hand. "Pick a door." He turned wildly, scanning the space. There were no doors. Only endless, shifting white. The floor beneath them cracked. Adrian sucked in a breath. The only way forward was to choose, to observe a single reality and force it into being. His vision blurred as the world folded in on itself. He had seconds. He made his choice. Adrian's breath came in ragged gasps as the world around him twisted. The floor beneath his feet felt unstable, shifting between solidity and nothingness. Myra's grip tightened on his wrist, grounding him for a moment, but the flickering figures, their own reflections scattered through fractured possibilities, remained. They weren't just watching anymore. They were moving. One version of Adrian stood at the edge of the shifting space, staring blankly ahead, his features void of recognition. Another was sprinting in the opposite direction, vanishing into the white void. Others twitched in place, caught in half-executed decisions, like corrupted data loops. Jonas scanned the chaos, his expression grim. "We don't have much time." Myra's voice was urgent. "Adrian, choose." The words lodged deep in his chest. Choose what? The space around them was unraveling, the very structure of the prison breaking apart into something unrecognizable. But then, deep within the flickering instability, something caught his eye. A sliver of consistency. Door. Not like the seamless passages that had appeared before. This one was different. A solid, rusted metal door, embedded in the shifting white like an anchor against the storm. Adrian pointed. "There." Mira followed his gaze, then bolted toward it without hesitation. Jonas was a step behind. The versions of themselves reacted instantly. Some reached for them, their hands stretching unnaturally, fingers elongating as if desperate to pull them into their frozen loops. Others simply flickered out of existence, their realities overwritten. Adrian's muscles burned as he ran. The ground warped beneath him, stretching the distance. But he refused to stop. The door was getting closer. He could see it now. Old, heavy, marked with symbols that flickered between recognition and nonsense. Jonas reached it first, slamming a palm against the rusted surface. "Help me!" Mira reached his side, pressing her weight against the door as well. It didn't budge. Adrian was almost there when a hand grabbed his ankle. He crashed to the ground, breath knocked from his lungs. Twisting, he found himself staring into the eyes of himself. One of the echoes, this one with a hauntingly empty gaze. The grip on his leg was ice cold, unyielding. The other Adrian's lips moved, barely above a whisper. Stay. A ripple of nausea rolled through him. The word wasn't a plea. It was a command. A gravitational force trying to drag him into stillness, into one of the fractured states where time had no meaning. Adrian kicked hard, his foot connecting with something solid. The echo didn't react, but its grip loosened just enough. He scrambled free, lunging toward the door. Mira reached for him, catching his arm and pulling him forward as Jonas threw his full weight against the rusted frame. The door gave way. They stumbled through. The moment Adrian crossed the threshold, the noise stopped. The shifting, flickering distortions vanished. Silence. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. The air was thick, charged with something other. It smelled different here. Dust, metal, and something faintly electric. Slowly he looked up. They were no longer in the white void. This place had structure. Walls of dark steel. Exposed pipes running along the ceiling. The floor beneath him was solid, cold, industrial. Jonas exhaled sharply, pushing himself upright. We made it. Mira turned in a slow circle, taking in the space. What is this place? Adrian followed her gaze. The room was large, cavernous, its walls lined with consoles blinking with unfamiliar data. Unlike the sterile, infinite white they had escaped, this place felt real. His gaze landed on a massive glass panel along the far wall. He staggered to his feet and moved toward it, heart hammering. Outside the glass was space. Stars stretched endlessly beyond, distant and cold. And below them, far below, a planet, Earth. Adrian's stomach twisted. We're not on the ground. Jonas stood beside him, his expression unreadable. No. Mira turned sharply. Then where are we? Jonas exhaled. I have a theory. Adrian clenched his fists. Then start talking. Jonas gestured toward the consoles. This isn't just a prison. It's a containment system. Lab maybe. The white void we were in. That was part of the experiment. A controlled environment. But this. He motioned to the room around them. This is the real world. Myra's jaw tightened. So we were inside some kind of construct? Jonas nodded. And whoever built it, whoever is running it, they're still watching. Adrian's skin prickled. How do you know? Jonas pointed. At the far end of the room, beyond the consoles, stood a single chair. And in that chair, slumped forward, was a person. Or what was left of one. The figure was emaciated, their skin pale, stretched too thin over sharp bones. Wires protruded from their skull, connecting them to the machines. Their mouth hung slightly open, eyes sunken and lifeless. Adrian swallowed hard. Who is that? Mira stepped closer, but Jonas caught her arm. Careful. A shiver ran down Adrian's spine. There was something wrong about the body. Not just the unnatural thinness, not just the way the wires burrowed into flesh. The feeling of it. Like it wasn't dead. Like it was still aware. Then slowly its lips moved. Single word. A whisper. Run. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. The word, whispered, fragile, hung in the air like a warning left too late. The figure in the chair remained motionless, the wires burrowing into its skull pulsing faintly. The body was drained, hollowed out by whatever process had kept it tethered to the machines. Yet something about it felt aware, as if it could see beyond them, beyond this room, beyond even this moment. Mira took a careful step forward. Who are you? No response. Only the faint hum of the machines. Jonas moved to one of the consoles, fingers skimming across the controls. Lines of data flickered across the screen, strings of symbols and equations that twisted and reformed as if resisting interpretation. His jaw tightened. This isn't just a prison. It's a relay. Adrian forced himself to look away from the slumped figure. A relay for what? Jonas exhaled sharply. Observation. Control. Whatever this place is, whoever built it, they weren't just keeping us here. They were watching. Mira glanced at the figure again, her fingers flexing at her sides. Then why warn us? Jonas shook his head. Maybe they're resisting. Maybe they're still connected to the system somehow. He turned back to the console, his expression darkening. But if that's true, then they're not the only ones watching. The screens flickered. Adrian stepped back, a cold dread creeping up his spine. Images swam through the distortion. Familiar faces, unfamiliar places. Moments that hadn't happened. Echoes of decisions not yet made. Then the static coalesced into something clearer. A reflection. Not of them. Of someone else. A figure stood on the other side of the glass. Featureless yet aware. Not just watching but acknowledging. As if the act of being seen had given it shape. Adrian's pulse hammered. Jonas. I see it. Jonas's voice was tight, controlled, but his fingers moved faster over the console. It's responding to us. The air grew heavier, the space itself pressing inward. The lights dimmed, the hum of the machines deepening into a vibration they could feel in their bones. Myra's voice was sharp. We need to get out of here. Jonas's hands didn't stop. Almost. The figure tilted its head. And then it moved. Not through the glass. Through them. The moment it passed, Adrian staggered. His vision fracturing. The room blurred, reality distorting like stretched film. For a second he wasn't standing in the control room. He was everywhere. Corridor of infinite reflections. A world that folded in on itself. A prison with no walls, no limits. Only observation. A voice echoed in his mind. Not spoken. Projected. You were never meant to leave. His breath hitched and suddenly he was back. Back in the room, back in his body. The weight of the moment crashing down on him. Jonas was gripping the edge of the console, knuckles white. Mira was panting, eyes wide. Her hand pressed to her temple as if steadying herself. Adrian swallowed hard. What the hell was that? Jonas turned to them, his face pale. A failsafe. Myra's voice was strained. Meaning what? Jonas met her gaze. His expression unreadable. Meaning we weren't supposed to see this. And now that we have, it's trying to correct the error. A metallic groan reverberated through the station. The lights flickered again, the screens flashing red. A single word scrolled across them, over and over. Reset. Adrian's stomach dropped. We have to move. Jonas slammed a fist against the console. I'm trying to shut it down. A low chime rang out. The same sound they had heard in the void. Mira grabbed Adrian's arm. Jonas, we don't have time. The figure in the chair exhaled sharply. A ragged, shuddering breath. And for the first time, its sunken eyes flicked toward them. Adrian froze. His lips parted. Barely a whisper. Run. The world collapsed.